You're listening to Convenience Matters, brought to you by NACS. Whether it's for food, fuel, drinks, or snacks, about half the U.S. population shops at a convenience store every day. We'll talk about what we see at stores and what the future may hold for our industry.
Usually when you talk about innovation, you think about different areas of the convenience store company. Today we're going to talk about innovation and other things like that and how it relates to human resources. What are the ideas out there that can prompt your business to drive forward, put the best face forward by having the best people there? And we're just going to have a good discussion about what are the issues that convenience stores need to look at in the labor market and the jobs market. My name's Jeff Lenard. I'm with NACS.
And I'm Carolyn Schnare, also with NACS.
So today on the phone, we have Joanne Losey. She is managing partner at Fortified Leadership Group, and she works with NACS and a whole bunch of issues related to HR. And at the outset, we talked about innovation related to HR. Joanne, Joanne, thank you for joining us by phone. What are some of the innovations that we're seeing that are beyond the norm in HR, where we traditionally think of it as guardrails, or you put out a HR manual and it's relatively static? What are some of the developments that are moving it beyond the static?
Sure. I think what I would start with is that the fundamental responsibilities of human resources in the convenience store industry are not going to change. We're going to really remain with how do we find potential candidates, how do we attract them, how do we recruit them, get them on board, trained, and ready to really provide a great customer experience and deliver results for the organization. Where the innovation is really going to come in is really how are we going about doing all of those practices. And I think the area that I would say is really the most innovative right now probably has to do with how we're attracting and finding those candidates in the marketplace.
Now, you talk with a lot of individuals within our industry about that. Now, so what are some of the most innovative, interesting ways that convenience store customers are going, or companies, are going about that, finding those key, fun, good, happy, entertaining customers, especially with a tight labor market?
Well, and a lot of this is going to vary by market, just as you said, in terms of the labor pool itself. But, actually just having, talked with a lot of HR leaders, I would say there's a lot of innovation going on, a lot in terms of social media. So how we go about leveraging, a more digital experience. So everything from putting job postings out and creating some real good PR out there around the things the organization is doing in the community, how it's supporting employee growth and development, and using social media to really provide a stepping stone for potential candidates to see what it would look like to work at an organization. And that's really a new, interesting, and innovative way. And organizations are tackling that in just a whole variety of creative ways.
Well, that's really interesting in thinking about social media. And I think in a lot of organizations, you have public relations, and that's separate from government relations, and that's separate from human relations. They're all tied into relations, but social media is about that experience and telling that story. And your clerk is the frontline face of the business to somebody who comes in. So you want to align all those things. You want to have human resources lined up with potentially government relations and public relations, and tell a consistent story, whether it's through your clerks or through your various other channels.
Yeah, and the way to think about, and many organizations do, the individuals, your team members, are really the ambassadors for your brand in a different way than your marketing and your signage and where you're located. And those are all really critical in terms of getting people to come in and having a great experience. But a lot of our conversations a lot of the conversations I have with HR leaders in the industry is about how do we really reframe our team members as ambassadors? So it's not only at that point of sale, but as they go out and they will engage in social media on their own, how are we going to use that and leverage that to help people understand what it's like to come work for us, why that's an exciting and energizing thing, and for many places, how do you build your career while you're working for that organization? And so it's both, what the organization is planning to do using social media, and that might be around job posts and promoting the organization, but also thinking that, the ambassadors that work for us, how are they talking about their experience and how they leverage social media to do that and share that with their families and with their friends in the community.
And that ambassador word, I love that, because we've talked not long ago about Amazon Go and the store that opened up out Western America that just doesn't have any people out there, relies entirely on technology, which is cool, I guess. But then there's no people, as you've said before, there's no people to yell at when something doesn't go right. But in this case, your ambassador's not there smiling back at you or helping you or just saying good morning to you in some of those automated stores. And while automation certainly takes some of the cost out of labor, I think that could even be said that it's costing you more. Would you agree with something like that, given the ambassador idea?
Well, I think that the whole concept of, you're talking about somebody to interact with, somebody to complain to, but I think the very unique piece of the convenience store industry is that many people are stopping as they're starting their day and visiting on their way home. And so, one of the conversations we had, which was like, hey, you know what, we're spending a lot of time with people. And we're not just going to be, store clerks. We are in relationship with the community and the people that we have. And those bonds that are really galvanized in every customer interaction is actually going to be, Jeff, to your point, PR, it's going to be marketing, it's going to help to promote your brand. And so the more you can integrate this concept of having your team members understand what your brand is, live out your culture, and then be an ambassador for it, I think that is a completely different experience than somewhere where you go and there's no human interaction. Mm-hmm. And for many people, it's a great way to start their day and end their day. And often I hear stories of, how close the relationships have become over the years.
Yeah, and you hear everybody wants that cheers mentality. And Carolyn, I just saw there's a bar in Las Vegas. Check it out when you go to the NACS show, October 7th through 10th, Las Vegas. But there's a bar in Las Vegas that's robotic. There's a robot that makes the drinks and all that. And I would imagine it's really fun the first time, but maybe about 3 or 4 drinks in, like, who do you tell your problems to? The robot's just going to not care. He's going to be busy making the next drink. I'm sorry. I was gender specific.
Well, shoot, I can't even get my Alexa to have a conversation with me at home. So how am I going to talk to
just answer the questions? It's just like, I'm sorry, I don't. But yeah, those are all issues. And there is a huge need for human interaction. It allows you to guide people. And otherwise, it's just a very linear transaction, and it allows you to take things in a different way. You can come in a bad mood, leave in a good mood, and that's what people allow. And Joanne, you were recently at the NACS HR Forum, the Human Resources Forum, and we had a couple staff people go, and they came back, and I heard one thing: you need to go next year. They were super energized about the content and just the ideas that come out of this. I guess it's the biggest group of HR professionals within our industry that get together. They share ideas. They great presentations. What were some of the takeaways this year that you saw, Joanne, in leading the discussion at the HR Forum?
Yeah, thank you. One of the things I would say that was pretty much consistent throughout, the entire event was really the role that culture plays in driving success for the organization. We specifically talked about, what is a culture for innovation? What's a culture that's primed to be innovative? And talked really around, culture, which has several definitions. A lot of people say it's just the way we do stuff here. So culture, which feels kind of squishy, actually has a really tangible impact on how we get results and how we really attract and retain those employees, help them to grow and develop and have long-standing careers should they elect to do so, in our organizations. So culture and its role in terms of supporting how we can innovate to respond to both the market, society, cultural norms that are shifting on an ongoing basis is really going to be critical. So that was really one of the biggest takeaways. The next big takeaway, and I know this is no surprise to anyone listening, is that the legal and legislative landscape continues to shift, and in some cases pretty rapidly, in some places not quickly enough. And so as we're leaning into those labor issues that face us in a pretty unique way, how are we going about, not only understanding what is, but what are we anticipating and what can I do about it? And so we had several hours worth of presentations that were very targeted around some of the changing landscape around benefits, around wage and hour, the multitude of minimum wage laws that are going into place, the legalization of marijuana in some jurisdictions, and really how do we continue to build workplace cultures that respect all cultural differences. And so as you think about really kind of some of the biggest issues that's facing us is kind of how do we have our culture really be unique to us, and how do we respond to those changing needs in a way but not lose who we are. And then really just like those other processes about how do we recruit people, how do we get them excited and energized, and how do we make sure that they stick around. Those are the biggest conversations.
Well, I thought you said earlier, you also said, and how do you get them to stick around? That's an important thing, because I think that's something that's often overlooked for our industry, not within our industry, but outside of it, that there is a really strong career path. If an employee and an employer want there to be within this industry, people start doing the cashier shift or the manager shift. And a lot of folks have risen to really high levels within companies. That's something I think that's really incredible with our industry.
Yeah, and I think some organizations have really grasped this concept of career growth and really understanding, it's not a new issue that people want to, develop and get feedback and grow. I think people think it's a generational thing, but if each of us, no matter what career stage you're in, thinks back to our first job, we wanted opportunity. We wanted to grow and develop. And the organizations that are really starting to identify how do they present that in a way that speaks to the current entrance into the workplace, I think are having some great success. And it's tied up in not only kind of what is the job that you'll be performing, but how are we going to support you in being successful, not only in the role that you're doing today, but as you look ahead and think about how you're going to grow and develop through the rest of your career. So absolutely agree with you on that, Carolyn.
And another element of that is you often hear, and correct me if I'm wrong, the number one reason somebody leaves a job is they don't like their supervisor. That is the most often cited reason. And that's in jobs that somebody may be at a desk, maybe a smaller environment, maybe limited interaction, where the idea of a boss or a supervisor is more powerful because there are only a couple people you talk to in a given day. However, when you're a clerk in a store, for instance, when you're a frontline employee or some other interaction within the store, you're dealing with hundreds of people on a daily basis. Are there any ways that companies are looking at the benefits of all of these wonderful conversations? We're somewhat in a unique opportunity in retail in general, where people may stay at a job because they love the people they interact with, and they may not even be with the same company. And is there something that we can tap into, or people are doing a good job tapping into, about the whole customer relationships that go well beyond your coworkers?
Yeah, and that's I think a great insight for lots of folks, which is, while for some individuals this is not their cup of tea, for many other people this is actually where they get their energy and where they really thrive in terms of building those relationships. And what I'll tell you is that while I agree with you that many people leave, their supervisor, manager, research supports that over and over again, one of the ways that organizations can truly differentiate themselves and hopefully retain individuals who are committed to doing just what you suggested is really what we'll call the onboarding process. And that's everything from when that person gets their job offer and accepts it, through when they are, I'll say, pretty self-sufficient. Now, I don't mean 100% self-sufficient. That'll take time. But some organizations are really spending a differential amount of time on the onboarding process. So when a person shows up on the first day, there's always going to be the requisite filling out of certain paperwork, making sure that you've completed all the legal documents. And once that's complete, what does that experience look like? And some organizations that we were actually talking about this at the HR forum, we talked about this. And, in one case, one of the persons said, we just had to put that person in the job. We were down a certain number of team members, and that person just had to fill the hole. Well, it wasn't too surprising that a month or two later, that person was already looking for another role somewhere else. Whereas some organizations who take the time to really invest in training, and I don't just mean training on a technical side, but really how do we interact with customers? What does it mean to work here? What does it mean to be a team member? How do we support each other? And how do we work together in a way that we deliver that experience live out our values and really live up to the brand promise that we have. And so as you're, thinking about how do you bring people on board and what does that first sort of 1 to 3 days look like? And I'm not even suggesting you put people through a lot of training classes, but how you onboard those folks in those first few days has a lot to do with whether or not they're going to stick around and what the quality of the experience will be, not only for your customers, but for the rest of the team with whom they work.
Yeah, I mean, I can't imagine. I mean, going into a new job is hard enough. I mean, you don't really know that many people, probably. You don't know where you're going to even sit, and you don't know where you're going to do. And that would be a horrible experience, just thrown in. We just need you now. Get over there, start cleaning or whatever.
It's fill a hole.
Yeah, exactly. Just get to work. And now it's your hair's on fire. I'd probably leave too. I'm like, I don't even remember your name. Sure, I'll just do that. But at NACS, I know our HR directors go there to the HR forum. And I know Greg came back from NACS with some great ideas. And one of his newest things that he wants to do is on an employee's first day at NACS. Now we have, at our headquarters, they come in and they get a huge plethora of NACS, I guess, bling, without a lack of a better term. We get a NACS water bottle, NACS socks. You get the NACS Christmas ornament. You get an assortment of candies and drinks and waters and all this really cool stuff so that when you show up on your first day at your desk, you walk in and it's like he showed us an example where he spelled someone's name out in candy bars. I'm like, whoa, that's so cool. So we only can hire people with really short
6
names.
letters or
yeah,
less, yes.
Otherwise you can't fit it on a
no
desk.
hyphenated middle names and all that other stuff. But yeah,
but what a way to feel awesome that day. You come in with a smile and there's candy.
Everybody remembers their first day of work, and they usually remember it as filling out paperwork. And so how do you, he used a phrase, it was moments of connection, or moments of joy, or something like that. But certainly something that he came back from the HR forum with. And there's one immediate takeaway that's affected NACS. And so we're active participants in this meeting.
And what better way than to make somebody an ambassador for your organization, back to our earlier conversation, than to not only give them, apparel or ways for them to represent who they're working for outside of the workplace, at the gym with a water bottle or a T-shirt or something like that, so that they can talk about it, but really to create a sense of belonging and connection. And that's really, if I don't feel connected to the organization that I'm working for, how could you possibly expect me to feel connected to customers or create that connection? That connection between the employee experience and the customer experience is such a critical link that's often overlooked and not necessarily capitalized upon.
Now, speaking of overlooked, I didn't want to overlook some of the legal issues that you had mentioned earlier. And you mentioned marijuana. And I know that because there are state laws, and I believe California was among the more recent entrants in the beginning of 2018, there's dynamics in play there with when do you think about drug testing? And I suppose for people in multi-state areas, I guess there's additional concerns because if, let's just say you're in 2 states and one state has marijuana legal and one doesn't, do you look at drug testing differently? And does that set up any sort of legal ramifications? Or because federal law trumps all of this, there's a whole lot there that you need to look at that is, as we started at the program, innovative because the traditional way of thinking may not work.
Yeah, and this is where I would say it is really highly dependent upon the jurisdiction that you're in. You're right, at this point, federal law would transcend all of the local jurisdiction laws. And obviously, when we're talking about safety, and the safety of not only the individual, but other individuals, so like over the road or driving, transportation as that's part of the role. But a lot of, it was really a very eye-opening conversation from the attorneys who were sharing with us kind of what's going on in this space. And a lot of challenges are coming up, and in particular around the medical use of marijuana. We were talking about recreational use, but what about those for whom that's been prescribed? And so this is an area where I would say keep your eyes open. I wouldn't say that anything is firm in terms of what the decisions are. Lots of court cases are in queue. Lots of conversation that's going to be happening, I would project not only now, but into the near future around what does this mean and what can or can't you do as an employer to ensure that you're, keeping people safe, making sure that people are abiding by the policies and norms of your organization. And so lots of different things happening. So for those of you in jurisdictions where this is really really relevant, I would really encourage you to really like seek out what's locally, what the norms are and what the trends are and what might be coming in terms of precedents through the legal system.
Yeah, it's definitely something we should all keep an eye on, and it's going to continue to evolve, I think. Well, I'm sure it will. And so I have one last question that I wanted to ask you about, making your company stand out. Because if a great employee is a great employee and there's either being scouted or looking at different places that they want to work at, what is some advice for a company that they can use to stand out, to differentiate themselves, to make themselves be an employer of choice? I know we talk a lot about culture. We talk a lot about community involvement, charitable giving. What are some of the things, or one or two things that someone listening could do to make themselves be the most awesome employer ever?
Well, we don't really have that much time, but let me give you what I can in a short period. That's a loaded question, Kira. That's our last question. Okay.
We'll have to do it again.
What I would say. So the first thing I would say is know who you are and what you're about. I mean, some of that is culture. Some of it is brand and being clear on who you are. Talking about kind of what are your values. For some organizations, they're just hang on the wall, but truly understanding and integrating who you are, and what you're about. Number one, I would say that really kind of understanding that, because then you can actually create a very seamless message to the people who work for you, from the people who shop or buy from you, for the people who are in the community with you. And so acting with that level of consistency and holding people accountable to, I'm not saying you're being rigid about holding them accountable, but if these are the ways that we're intended to act, I would say that's going to be one way. The second thing I would say is to continue to think about investing in labor. For so many organizations, it's a big expense on the line. And I get it. It's expensive. It's expensive to recruit people. It's expensive to retain them, the benefits, wages, and especially as those continue to have cost pressures. But really think about, how are we investing in the organization and how are we investing in the people? And I've had several conversations over the last year with several HR leaders in the industry about this change in mindset from thinking about labor as an expense to how are we investing in this resource, which, to be honest, is pretty critical in terms of delivering the business that we're in, which is a very people-intensive business. And so if we're thinking about investing in our real estate, in equipment, in innovation, in food service, and all those different areas that are making and changing our industry, really not thinking about labor as an expense. Because if we're thinking about it as an investment, it's going to be something we're thinking about more than just transacting on it, but thinking about it for the longer term and creating that connection, which will pull through your entire employee experience. And then, Jeff, you touched on it earlier, is really equipping supervisors, district managers with the right tools, leadership development where appropriate, so that they can really understand their own natural strengths, how to leverage the strengths of the people who work for them, and then what are the ways that they can go about setting clear expectations, holding people accountable to them, rewarding them, and helping people to grow and develop. So if you're thinking about, yeah, go ahead.
If I could summarize that, there's a huge difference between a company that says people are our greatest asset and companies who say people are our greatest expense. And that is basically the bottom line. You want to be that company that considers people your biggest asset, and you want to live that.
So, Joanne, where can people that want to learn more about Joanne and what you know, where can they find you?
Well, my website is fortifiedleadershipgroup.com. And I do work a lot, as Jeff said at the top of the hour, I work a lot with NACS. So between the HR Forum and the NACS Leadership for Success program, those are two ways that I interact quite frequently with the NACS organization. And so either of those events, you'll get to see me, or please feel free to visit my website.
Well, we appreciated having you on here. And as you said, we could have had a whole nother conversation. So I hope we do. And I hope we talk to you again. Thank you so much for being on the show. And thank you for listening to Convenience Matters.
Convenience Matters is brought to you by NACS and produced in conjunction with Human Factor Media. For more information, visit convenience.org.